is one of the key elements to be able to visualize and believe in yourself and be able to perform on demand. So that these are quite critical elements which you really have to learn. And so building the trust in us, which enables us to build trust in our leaders and then also the trust in our peers. There's a lot of communication going on, and not obviously in the air because it's very loud, but on the grounds we do like a lot of walking these positions through. So it's a lot of practicing of building muscle memories, but also understanding and working with each other's where we have maybe physical restrictions or there might be some difficulties to fly a certain position, to communicate amongst each other to ensure that we can work with each other to make this happen. So one person is not making it to this formation, the record is not happening. So it's really about individual performance, but it's at the end of the day, it's a team and how to make this work. So it's really critical that everybody individually is performing, but as a team we're performing, and we can rely on the leaders to make the right decision.
So Barbara, I mean, I love this part of your experience, and I could spend all day, probably more than a day, talking about it, because there's so many examples, there's so many analogies that we can look at, you know, specifically around the leadership component of this successful world record. So, I mean, the question I'll ask now is, I suppose for you, what are the sort of the most transferable, you know, sort of leadership learnings that you can take from that particular experience, and then we can, you know, sort of transfer them and transmit them into an organizational context?
Mm-hmm. I think there's like three key things for me. This facilitation of the environment for individuals to succeed. I think that probably summarizes it up. And I'm probably similar to it, like a parent, you want to facilitate, you know, the environment for your child to basically get the best out of be able to get your child to get the best out of their lives. Sure. I think there's 3 points to that. So as skydiving as well as in the business as a leader, I think it's important that the trust, build a network of trust is really crucial, especially in skydiving, because obviously there's a lot on stake. A mistake has fatal consequences. So it's really about being able to trust each other, that we have the capabilities, we are honest about our capabilities, and also being able to raise if there are any issues, because it put potentially other people's life on risk. So we really have this trust, building this trust, and it's not something which is a given. It obviously needs, especially in skydiving as well, there's people from all over the world we haven't met before, and sometimes to know that the leaders are comfortable that these people which are in this group of, you know, in skydiving attempt or in a training camp, they have these capabilities. I've been in this situation where I have been, we call it being cut, you know, being cut out of this group because obviously didn't have the capability, and that was important to have a leadership team to make this decision, to ensure that everybody else feels safe in this environment. So it's really about the trust amongst each other. I think the other one is just about the safe environment. So to have basically create and sustain a physical but also psychological safe environment. And I think in business that is really important as well. A lot of the focus in business is really about physical environment. I think more it's also about the psychological environment, that people feel safe where they are, how they're working, how they're engaging. I think it's a very, very important part. Skydiving, absolutely psychological safe environment besides the physical psychological environment. Obviously we need to make sure that people feel comfortable to speak up, and also feel comfortable with, you know, the pressure which they put on potentially on performance on a certain day, that they can actually handle that. So that's really important. And I think the third point is about as a leader to be clearly articulating your goals. You know, the psychological part is really driving performance or is also limiting performance. And but obviously to have this empowerment and to feel mentally healthy, that actually helps with the performing. And generally we look, you know, just on skill set. If somebody has the skill set and you know, has been able to perform that in certain specific, and the mental piece is really has not been that much taken in account in a lot of these areas. Skydiving, very important. If somebody doesn't believe in themselves, if somebody feels they are threatened or they're on the cut, you know, one more mistake and people don't believe you anymore, don't trust you anymore that you can do it, and you kind of gone, not be a part of the record anymore, that will impact the performance of this person dramatically, because they obviously have a much more pressure. And I see that in businesses as well. I also think, as you mentioned before, there's also maybe a bit of lack of awareness in some areas of leaders moving into position, not actually being really aware of their mental health, and maybe nurture that in the same way as they nurture other elements of their personal development. I think it's important to have this self-awareness to be able to facilitate as a leader the environment for others. I might just take an example of the business I've been working over the last few years, the charity, which I called Share the Spark. One thing we started to do there is focusing on youth and looking at some of these kids which have a lot of pressure and stress experienced. And I think it more happens with the younger generation as well. They're exposed to that. How we can support them to maybe move towards a more fulfilling life. And that's a very high statement to that. But it's really looking at how they can identify and be more aware of what stress means for them, what pressure means, and how we can help them to react to that. I think a lot of people in our generation, and probably older generation even more, I look at my parents, I don't think they've ever been aware, you know, or have been asked themselves these kind of questions. Looking at my dad, I mean, he was a workaholic, and I don't think he ever really understood or has been, you know, asked his questions why he's smoking 2 packs of cigarette a day and why he's drinking every night, you know. So for him, that was just kind of an outcome and the survival kits he had. I think we are much more aware nowadays that what triggers certain things, how we feel, and I think we're more open around asking ourselves why we feel in a certain way. I think it's really important to have these discussions also with teams as a leader, to ensure that we can, as a leader, facilitate this environment as a safe and trusted environment, and guide individuals to deal with randomness and ongoing certainty, especially now where we, in our situation we are, to control and balance their responses, sometimes without expectations. And I think that's very challenging. I think to be able to do that as a leader, you have to have a really good self-awareness of where you're sitting, how you're reacting to stress, how you're reacting to randomness, how you're dealing with it. And we all have our historical behavior to survive and maybe to react and respond to that. Yeah, I think sometimes what I see in leadership environments, and just obviously talking to leaders a lot in coaching, it's just having these high goals on achievement, and obviously working in different environments, and also as a skydiver, as an athlete, I completely understand that. Like it's about being a high achiever and having these goals and these big dreams, and you know, having these great extraordinary achievements done. However, there's a lot of people might not have this you know, this goal to be extraordinary, and it's also to have this appreciation of being ordinary as an individual, which I think will then allow people to really reveal some new potentials to be extraordinary, if this makes sense. It's a bit contradictory, but when I say it in this way, but it's really to, I think, to celebrate success of being ordinary sometimes, and not and taking off this fear of always being a high performer in many ways, because we can't all be high performer. And just we also need people day.
You'll find audio and video recordings for this episode, as well as links and related resources mentioned today in the podcast area of 4iLeadership.com/insights. This is the Better World Leaders podcast, brought to you by 4i Leadership.